Okay, picture this. It is June 1944. You have just clawed your way through the absolute hell of the Normandy beaches. You're thinking, okay, the worst has to be over. But it's not. All of a sudden, the most powerful, most technologically advanced army the world has ever seen just stops. It grinds to a complete halt. And it's not stopped by a fortress, it's not stopped by a panzer division, it's stopped by what are essentially, well, farm fences. So that's the puzzle we're going to unpack today. When an unstoppable force meets a seemingly simple, immovable object, what happens next?
Just look at that date for a second. June 7th. That's one day, 24 hours after D-Day. These men had just survived the Atlantic Wall. They'd survived Omaha Beach. They had truly seen the worst that war could throw at them. Or so they thought. And then they encountered this, and it filled them with a totally different kind of dread. Can you even imagine that? You survive a hailstorm of machine gun fire and artillery only to be completely terrified by a quiet, green field? It tells you that what they found there was something truly monstrous. And this right here is the central, almost ridiculous fact of the battle for Normandy. You've got literally thousands of Sherman tanks. You have the entire industrial power of the United States behind you. And your army is being held hostage by property lines that were built by farmers centuries ago. It sounds like a joke, doesn't it? But for the men on the ground, this absurd situation was a living nightmare, and it was costing them everything.
So what on earth was this thing that could just stop an armored division dead in its tracks? Well, the soldiers who had to fight in it, they gave it a name that tells you everything you need to know. They called it the Green Hell. And this, was one of the great intelligence failures of the war. Planners back in London, they looked at maps, they saw these little lines crisscrossing the countryside, and they thought, oh, hedgerows, no big deal. They had absolutely no idea that they were sending their men into a ready-made labyrinth, a fortress designed for defense. The proper name for this landscape is the bocage. And we need to be really, really clear. These are not the little decorative hedges you might have in your front yard. Not even close. You should think of them as ancient earthen walls. For 1,000 years, farmers had been clearing rocks from their fields and piling them up on these banks. Over the centuries, the roots of trees and thorny bushes grew into them, weaving it all together like natural living concrete. This wasn't a fence. It was a fortress. And here's precisely why it was such a death trap. From the German perspective, it was a defender's paradise. They could dig into these thick earthen walls, creating these invisible nests for their machine guns and anti-tank weapons. Every single field became a perfect kill box. For the American tanks, though, it was a nightmare. The second a Sherman tank tried to crawl up and over one of these things, it would expose its thin belly armor. It was like a turtle flipped on its back. And the Germans would just wait for that moment to fire. The very weapon that was supposed to give the Allies the advantage, the tank, had become a steel coffin. And this is the butcher's bill. 10,000 American casualties to advance just 7 miles. I mean, let that sink in. That's over 1,400 men lost for every single mile gained. It's like wiping out an entire town just to capture a piece of land you could walk across in a couple of hours. At this rate, the Allies were going to bleed out Normandy. The entire invasion, literally the fate of the free world, was getting choked to death in these hedgerows. So you can imagine that the top brass, the generals back at headquarters, they were panicking. And they tried everything in the book. They sent in combat engineers with explosives. Well, that basically just sent the Germans a written invitation saying, hey, we're going to attack right here in about 5 minutes, so please aim all your guns at this spot. They tried bringing in giant bulldozer tanks, but those were just big, slow, juicy targets. Every single official, top-down, by-the-book solution was a catastrophic failure. They needed something different, something from out of left field. And this brings up a really interesting question, one that applies way beyond the battlefield. Think about it. When you're facing a problem that feels impossible, maybe at your job, in your business, whatever, where do you automatically look for the answer? Do you wait for the so-called expert, the CEO, the guy with the fancy title, or could it be that the real solution, the game-changing idea, is hiding with the person who's actually on the ground, dealing with that problem every single day? Well, the answer to Normandy's impossible problem didn't come from a West Point graduate with a map. It came from the guy you'd least expect, a 29-year-old sergeant from New Jersey named Curtis Cohen. He wasn't an engineer, he wasn't some high-ranking officer. He was a tanker. His job before the war, he sold liquor. In the grand scheme of the U.S. Army, he was just one tiny, anonymous cog in a massive machine. But that one little cog was about to change everything.
And the origin of the idea itself is just fantastic. You gotta picture the scene. A bunch of exhausted, mud-caked tankers are sitting around, complaining, probably sharing their last cigarette. And then, some private from Tennessee, whose name is lost to history, he just cracks a joke. He says something like, heck, why don't we just get some big ol' saw teeth and stick them on the front of the tank and just cut through this stuff? And, most of the guys probably chuckled. It's a silly, ridiculous idea. But Sergeant Cullen, he didn't laugh. He heard that offhand comment, and he saw a flicker of absolute genius. Cullen's thinking was just beautifully simple. He broke the problem down. The core issue was climbing over, so he thought, what if we go through? But what could possibly be strong enough to punch through feet of packed earth and roots? Then he had another flash of insight. He looked around at the beaches, which were still covered in those giant, spiky steel obstacles the Germans had put there to stop the landing craft. He realized he was surrounded by tons of high-grade German steel. So he took the enemy's own defensive weapons, basically scrap metal at this point, and with a simple welding torch, he decided to turn it into the very thing that would defeat them. Can you imagine the tension on July 14th, the day of the first official test? You've got all these officers standing around, arms crossed, probably expecting another failure. The tank revs its engine, drives straight at the hedgerow, and it doesn't try to climb. It just disappears. There's this incredible sound of tearing metal and ripping earth, and then, less than 5 seconds later, it bursts through the other side. The soldiers who were watching just erupted. They started screaming, cheering, because in that one moment, they didn't just see a piece of machinery work. They saw hope. They saw a way out of the green hell. Word spread like wildfire, all the way up to the top commander in the sector, General Omar Bradley. He came down, he watched one demonstration, and he got it. Instantly. He didn't say, let's form a committee. He didn't ask for a 20-page report. His orders were immediate and clear. I want these things made. I want them on as many tanks as we can manage. Start right now. Round-the-clock production. This is top priority. That, right there, is what real leadership looks like. Recognizing a brilliant idea, no matter who it comes from, and throwing the full force of your authority behind it without hesitation. So for the next 11 days, the entire rear area of the American Army transformed into this massive, chaotic, open-air factory. Welders worked day and night, the light from their torches never went out, and in just over a week, they performed an industrial miracle. They created 500 tanks, all fitted with what the soldiers were now calling the Cool-in Rhino device, or just rhino horns. 500 angry metal rhinos were about to be unleashed on the German lines. So, July 25th, the big breakout offensive, Operation Cobra, begins. It starts with one of the heaviest aerial bombardments in history. And the result? The infantry advances a single, agonizing mile. The despair started creeping back in. But then, on July 26th, the Rhino tanks led the assault. They didn't need to find gaps, they didn't need roads, they just made their own path, ripping straight through the bocage. And in just 48 hours, the German defensive front, which had held firm for almost 2 months, didn't just bend, it shattered. And the numbers? Well, the numbers tell the whole story. 70%. That means 7 out of every 10 times an American unit successfully broke through a German position during this critical operation. It was a Rhino tank leading the way. Think about that. A simple, common-sense idea from a sergeant, built using enemy scrap metal, turned out to be more decisive than thousands of tons of bombs dropped from the sky. It's just incredible proof that the most powerful solutions often come from the ground up. Okay, so why are we talking about this? It's a great war story for sure. But what does a story about welding from 1944 have to do with you right now? Well, I think it's because this isn't really just a story about a tank. It's a timeless blueprint for how to solve any problem that feels impossible. Whether you're dealing with a business challenge, a tough project at work, or just a personal obstacle that you can't seem to get over, the lessons from Sergeant Cullen's invention are surprisingly relevant. So what's that blueprint? Well, first, it's about listening to the people on the front lines. The folks actually doing the work, they understand the problem better than anyone. So next time you're in a meeting, maybe ask the quietest person in the room for their opinion. They might have the Rhino idea. Second, embrace simple solutions. We have a tendency to think the smartest answer has to be the most complex, but it's often not true. Third, act with urgency. When a good idea finally surfaces, hesitation is your enemy. And finally, and this might be the most important one, you have to create a culture where a Sergeant Cullen feels safe enough and empowered enough to share his crazy idea in the first place. You know, the ultimate validation for this whole story came years later, from the Supreme Allied Commander himself, who later became President Eisenhower. He loved this story because for him, it proved that the real strength of an army or any organization isn't just the genius of its generals. It's in having a system where a brilliant idea from a little sergeant, as he put it, can travel up the chain of command and be acted upon. An idea that, without a doubt, saved thousands and thousands of lives. So it really leaves us with one final thought. In your world, are you the next Sergeant Cullen with a simple idea that could change everything? Or maybe just as important, are you the General Bradley, the leader who's actually ready to listen?